Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Congressman Cohen.
Thank you, sir. I missed the earlier part of the hearing. Did anybody talk about the effect of climate change on human health? A little bit, Dr. McElwee. My staffer was saying about how I was saying what issues might be pertinent to Memphis, and it gets hot in Memphis and all through the South, and the South is known for a lot of kidney stones and the heat belt and stroke belt. As it gets hotter and hotter, people drink more tea and get more kidney stones. What are the different illnesses and maladies that will beset people because of climate change that you have ascertained?
I'm not a health expert, but based on the National Climate Assessment that came out last year for the United States, certainly heat waves, and that's what we had talked about with Representative Christ earlier. We know that heat waves and extreme heat events are going to increase as our emissions and our temperatures continue to rise. And so there are a number of health effects that are associated with those heat events, and they certainly tend to be exacerbated in urban areas where we have urban heat island effects as well. So certainly that's an area where the human health effects and so forth, the damages around that need to be weighed. We've talked a lot about, well, what are the costs of action? I really want to emphasize there are a lot of costs of inaction, and those include the health impacts of these extreme events that we're increasingly seeing. And our National Climate Assessment points out that it is really the southern region that is going to be seeing those as we move forward.
Yes, ma'am.
The other angle that I would speak to on that, and I agree with absolutely everything that Dr. McElwee said, when we're talking about health and climate change, it's not only the health impacts of climate change itself, but the health benefits that we can derive by getting off of fossil fuels, and in particular, air pollution and all the health impacts that stem from that in terms of asthma, heart disease, et cetera, pose very serious both human and economic costs. One analysis that I'll mention that WRI was involved in found that measures to cut U.S. emissions about in half by 2030 would actually generate up to around $56 billion in health benefits in 2030, primarily as a result of avoiding air pollution.
Great.
Thank you.
Is it Heidi Mountain?
It is. I love that that's happened here too. It's easier in the mountains. Everybody's ready to gravitate to
It's
that.
fire's fault. It's not mine.
I was just going to share that there's the direct effects when we think about it's a hotter, drier planet, and then we have to recognize all of the ecosystem level changes, the atmospheric changes that go along with that, and it's hard to trace everything that goes back to how healthy is any one human or communities at large. Resilience says we want to put health first and foremost and take care of people, and so that's an important piece. So if we have a warmer, drier planet, then we have more fires, and when we have more fires, we have air pollution. And we also have a loss of feeling of control, and what we haven't mentioned yet, and this isn't my expertise, but it ties into mental health. And so much of our human well-being depends on where and how we feel about what we do and don't have control over in our world.
Let me go from there. You people first is a great idea, but animals second, and fires in Australia and koalas. Darwin made it to Australia, didn't spend a lot of time there on the Beagle or getting off the Beagle, but he did think about evolution when he was there, when he saw the platypus and thought about and some other animals there that seemed obscure. And this unique area had such unique animals. What are we possibly losing in the terms of extinction? I mean, there's some effort to put koalas on the extinction list. Are there other tiny little varmints that might have disappeared?
I have to say I've read the news a lot since the fires got big and vast. They name a lot of unique species that I don't know well, even though I've been to Australia, because as you mentioned, they're small or they're unusual. What I can tell you is that it's incredible to go someplace and see an animal that doesn't look like anything you could have even imagined. Wombat, they've been on the news a little bit, not as much as the koalas, and that's because species differ in their capacity to keep themselves safe. Kangaroos are less impacted because they ran away. Koalas are slow and have a very unique food source. They're kind of stuck. Wombats dug underground. That's where they live, is underground. And so they weathered, the firestorm, literally, across their habitat, and now they're struggling for food. So, you know, some of the relief efforts that are going to Australia in care of animals is where and how can you provide food and water to animals that can't get to accessible food and water, and that's something that, you know, people in America can help contribute to.
Yeah, Australia is a unique area for its flora and its fauna, and it's some of it's jeopardized. Indeed, if I can have a few extra minutes, since there's nobody here to thank you, sir. Climate change, important, serious, top of the chain. Technological advancements that threaten the environment too, like plastic, and the large amounts of plastic that's floating out there in the Pacific Ocean and that interfere with birds and fish and eating and killing and dying and blah, blah, blah in Midway Island. Anybody got any experience on plastic and what we, yes, sir, please.
Given that you're from Tennessee, I'd just like to draw attention to Eastman Chemical Company.
I'm from Memphis. It's just about a different part of the world.
I'm from Boston, so.
You're closer to
Tennessee, I'm
Eastman than I
closer.
am.
Yeah, exactly right. But anyways, there's a lot of interesting industry academic partnerships, and we're learning more as we can about plastics in the ocean and microplastics in the ocean. We truly don't have agreed upon definitions of how small a microplastic is or how big it gets before it's something else. We don't understand the physical transport of it. We don't understand how it's transported down into the deep sea. We don't understand how one company's plastic might be different from another company's plastic in terms of how it degrades or is preserved in the environment. So we're still, like many things in ocean sciences or land sciences or energy sciences, we are still in many ways in the gathering information mode. And particularly in the oceans, we don't know what's out there. We don't understand how it works. So we could talk about Oceans and Human Health, which is a NSF, NIH jointly studied, jointly supported program. They are interested in the impact of the oceans on human health. We don't understand, back to plastics, how plastics propagate up the food chain or downward, which is why my singular recommendation to you folks as my written testimony is we need more ocean observations. We need more terrestrial observations. We need to get that data there that you folks can then use to write informed legislation that makes sense. It makes sense financially, it makes sense socially, but also makes sense in that it's going to work. It's going to actually be targeting the right thing. And I think that's listening to this conversation here today, that's a unifying thing that I see coming for here.
Could I add one thing to your question?
Sure, please.
The one thing we do know is that what determines whether or not significant amounts of plastic waste make it to the ocean is whether or not a nation has a waste collection and management system. So we know that most of that plastic waste in the ocean is coming from countries that don't have waste collection and management systems, and the countries that don't have waste collection and management systems are poor countries. So it's another kind of case of why we need economic development.
But even we have waste collection systems, if we don't get rid of single-use plastics, and I commend my chair for having these glasses and water that we can pour rather than continue to use these single-use plastics, which so many of the committees do, which is just awful to watch and witness. But we've got to get rid of single-use plastics, or we're going to continue to spoil our environment. I mean, and kill animals.
Yeah, but we need waste management collection systems to prevent that plastic from going into the oceans. This is the major finding of the Jamback study from 2015.
Well, that's true, but if we don't have all that plastic, because we don't have single uses, we have less need to do that. But beyond that, I want to talk to you anyway.
Yeah,
You talked about Senator Alexander, and he's my friend, and he might be for witnesses and be for common sense and the Constitution and fairness and justice and all those things. But he's not necessarily in favor of Bellefonte being redone. And you know Bellefonte in Alabama, do you not?
I do.
And there's a private group called Nuclear Development that wants to develop Bellefonte, and they want to do it privately and think they can do it. Would that not be something we need to pursue, and it's maybe where Lamar has a little error in his otherwise stellar record on nuclear?
Possibly, although my big point on nuclear is that we need a national nuclear strategy, and so we got to get away from this hodgepodge, potpourri nuclear, and to have something approaching what we were doing in the 50s, or something that's much more similar to what the Russians and Chinese are doing. Otherwise, it's just a kind of every day some new nuclear project that we kind of project our hopes onto, but it's not, it's not actually a plan.
But do you know anything about the Bellefonte plan? Do you know how practical that is? I mean, they've got some experts from Canada working on it.
I mean, I'm the most pro-nuclear person I know. So I mean, I'm in favor of doing more nuclear. But I'm here to say that we've had decades of people being like, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And that's not a plan. The Chinese and Russians have a plan. And if we're ready to cede this dual-use technology to the Russians and Chinese, we should make that decision, because right now we're just sleepwalking into it.
Let me close out with that. I'm happy to hear the Russians have a plan, because if the Russians have a plan, then Trump will have a plan. I yield back the balance of my time.